basically all my life I wanted a website because I I knew that having a website is kind of like the way you present yourself to the world in this very interconnected age. And when I was like 7 years old, I uh, managed to convince my dad to give me a WordPress blog, um, which I never used, but it was satisfying having a website. And ever since then, ever since I learned to program, I've been making my own websites, and I can never really decide what makes a good personal website, and I would always, like, a few months later, end up redesigning it over and over and over. Um, Part of the problem with that was that I didn't really have a good workflow for actually putting stuff on a website. It was often like in Markdown files or HTML files, and it'd be a lot of work to go in and actually change things once I'd built the site. And so one day I was just like cleaning up my room, and I realized that, oh, I'm cleaning up my physical workspace, but my digital workspace is actually quite messy, which led me to discover Notion, which led me to kind of organize my digital workspace, kind of instead of having things all in different folders and files all over my operating system, I kind of condensed it down to this software. And eventually I had this idea that, hey, this would be a great tool to build a website around. And so I went looking to see if Notion had any APIs, and they didn't. But I found a Python API, unofficial Notion API in Python, which is pretty easy to use. You just import it, give a token, which you can find by inspecting the cookies on Notion, and then you can basically get blocks and collections through Python. And so I decided to use this API to build a site from data I have on Notion, from like notes and pages I have in there. And that is what became this site. So there's a lot to kind of go into here. I have all the code. I do have all the code on GitHub, but it's also quite messy because it's very much made for myself to generate how I need it. So it's like using all the features of Notion that I use most. And let me see if I can move this out of the way. If you can see here, here's all the different blocks we have in Notion and the HTML output. And so these are just templates that it gets kind of like in data that's in each block and outputs it as HTML. And this library I made is essentially just to pull data from a collection, render it as HTML.
Are there any limitations to the API where there's like stuff that's represented in Notion that you can't access that data through the API, or is it one-to-one?
I haven't experienced that with Notion, for sure with Roam.
Okay.
Roam doesn't give much at all in their export, and it's quite aggravating. I'll get to that later, but like the IDs for my notes site are generated based off the titles because the Roam export doesn't include page IDs. It includes block IDs, but no page IDs, which is very strange, I think.
So how would something like a database view be exported from Notion? Or are you dealing mainly with like more of the text document exports?
So you mean like this kind of collection?
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically the website is structured around a few different collections. And in the code, I have this build. These are some automatic push messages.
Nice.
where is it? So here I just add the different collections that I'm pulling from. So I have pages, blog, wiki, and projects. And so each of them I have here. I can go into that, and these are all the pages that are just like aslen.me/about, aslen.me/wiki/learning, and I can kind of use the parameters however I want. So here I have the navigation on the side. I show like 1, 2, 3, 4
Gotcha.
for the order, and I can put these like new, old, just like little tags next to it. And so I'm kind of limiting myself to what I can do with these database views.
Gotcha.
And the code, it doesn't like look into for nested blocks or nested pages. So if I have another page like nested within this wiki page, it won't actually find that. I also have it so that I can put HTML inside a code block. It looks for if it's markup and then just renders it as templated HTML. So here I'm building the wiki. Here I'm building the wiki in 3 columns, just based off the wiki collection. And so it's a wiki collection here, and I can put a check mark on something if it's published or if it's like featured.
Wait, so are you doing layout in Notion as well? So if you change that 3 column in that Notion page, it would change to change it to a 2 column. You get 2 columns out here.
Yeah, and you can see here on the home page. The home page is actually whoops. So I have a key command that I can be on any page on my website and just go to that page directly in Notion. So I can press Control E, and it goes to my home page in Notion.
That's sick.
The way I'm doing that is actually I'm embedding a comment in the body here that says Notion ID, and then the ID of that goes into the URL. So I just put notion.so/this
Nice.
ID, and it loads the page properly. You can see that ID up here. It automatically puts the title also, but just that ID is required to find the right page on the right database. So here, yeah, I have these 2 columns, and I can actually change this if I want to resize the columns at all.
And so when you're getting the export data, Notion will give you like all the layout data as well of how the columns are arranged on a particular page.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
okay.
these are column blocks, and they have like a specific width and children inside them. So they just become divs in like a flex box.
Nice.
And so it works pretty well, and it makes it really flexible to kind of change layouts however I want, or have pages that look quite a lot different than other pages, more so than other kinds of like CMSs I've used in the past.
And you could go pretty nested with that, where if you wanted like a column with 2 rows in it, that would work fine in terms of both your side of it, or would you have to like hard code that you're expecting a column to have children with rows or something like that?
I mean, each block is kind of like a different row, right?
Yeah. But like, let's say you wanted on your site to have blogs separated into like the top 3 recents and then like the top 3 most viewed or something. And could you set that up in Notion and your backend would know how to deal with that? Or would you have to tell your backend, expect, instead of a template as a child of blog, expect 2 children?
Well, for the blog, I'm pulling pulling from the collection, so I can actually just like code whatever I want
Gotcha.
to be the result there. And so basically when I put up a new blog post, it will automatically put it here. I don't have to like manually put a link to it. I think that's just easier for the workflow.
Yeah.
I could manually put a link to it, but yeah, so here, just like if I publish it, it shows up, and it shows up by most recent.
Gotcha.
Something a little interesting is these icons I have next to the blog pages, also next to all the wiki pages. I had been thinking quite a lot about how we can like make links give more information than just the title of the page it's going to. And so this is kind of a way of peeking into the page. The complexity of these icons is related to the word count of the page. So as the page is like longer and longer, the icon becomes more and more complex. And these are actually what's called a Chladni pattern. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it's here's an example of like where you have sand on a plate, and if you have the plate vibrating, here, then it creates different patterns based on the frequency that the plate is vibrating. And so basically I'm just like upping the frequency as the like length of the article gets longer and longer. So this one, aphantasia, that's very short. You can see it's just one sentence. Yep. And if you go to like language learning techniques, that might be a bit longer.
Are those pulling from a set, or you're dynamically generating the icon based on the like specific word count?
It's actually pulling from a set just to make it quicker.
It makes a lot of sense.
So here, if I go to aslen.me/chladni/19,000.png. Oh, you can't see it because the background is black. Here, better if I go just to Chladni, then you can see all the icons that have been generated. And so it's just going in like each step is 100 I don't know, hertz or going up the frequency, and so it goes up to 20,000 here.
Wow.
Which I guess isn't that near the range of human hearing?
I think it's like 20, 22 or something.
Yeah. And so yeah, that's kind of the icons I'm working with, and this would be most complex. I mean, I think it generally works. Some are a bit ambiguous, like if this darker one seems maybe more complex than this lighter one. But in general, you can tell the difference between like the different stages of like this very simplistic shape, and as it gets more and more complex. And I think this is also kind of interesting because I was thinking of my wiki as a sort of like garden, and the ideas I put on it is like growing over time. And I think these icons, they kind of give this feeling of these little flowers. And so as I write more, it's just like flowering the ideas, which I think is a nice metaphor that goes with these little shapes.
I like it a lot.
Another thing here on this front page is that I'm putting just like a word count and a page count of my whole website. And so this is just collecting all the words and pages across my website and just putting it up there. It's not really for me per se. I don't particularly like having these metrics, because if I am trying to optimize the number of words on my website, then I'm not really thinking about the quality of those words I put out, but more, I think it's a hint of exploration, so that when you come to this front page, you kind of get a sense, even if you can't see it from here, you get a sense like how much stuff is on this site. And if you come back a year from now, maybe this will have 100,000 words, and you'll know that it's really grown by 4 times since you last saw it. So I think it's there for that kind of sense of exploration. I hope that kind of comes through, but I kind of like it, having it there.
It's kind of like a macro level version of the Chladni patterns, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like giving you a peek into how much stuff is behind whatever it is you're looking at.
Have you thought of any other metrics to communicate through, whether it's iconography or just like on a top level, that are interesting? I don't know if like something on internal number of links could be interesting, or things like that.
That would certainly be interesting for my notes site, I think, which I will get to now.
Awesome.
Because one thing that I've been thinking of for my notes website is, I haven't done this yet, but I kind of want to include these Chladni patterns, but instead of using them to signify the word count, use them to signify how interconnected a page is.
Awesome.
And so you could have like a really interconnected page, but it might have like a very simple icon, because you might have a really long page, but might have a simple icon because it's not interconnected. Or you might have a fairly short but really densely interconnected page that has a more complex icon.
Sweet. Before we jump into the node site, I know folks who are interested in your just like Notion workflow in general, separate from the site. I don't know if that's something you can speak on, just like if you're writing up a blog post, or just like how you're organizing and working through things.
Well, one of the problems is that I haven't actually put a whole lot of stuff yet on this site.
Okay.
I had a few blog posts. This is part of like the blogging futures blockchain.
Nice.
But I haven't gotten too much into like a big workflow for working with this. I basically just go whenever I want, write on the blog, and then update it.
So Notion almost is like the CMS as opposed to like a note.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I use Notion for other things like writing and having like books and different like bookmarks and movies I want to watch. Gotcha. Some other like projects down here that I was working on. Ever since I found Rome, I've been using that quite a lot for most of my writing, and haven't been using Notion as much, but I'm hoping to kind of get back into working with this main site a lot more, and kind of having my Rome-based note site kind of feed into this like main site, as like this is the hub of kind of more bigger essays and projects.
And then Rome being the micro notes and small things there.
Yeah, so
we had a question from Zach on the value of using Notion versus a traditional static site generator or anything like that.
I think it's partly my own preference of just really not liking the workflow of working with markdown files.
Okay.
It works for some people, but I just feel it's kind of like disconnected somehow from what I'm writing. And just like the process of going in, making a markdown file, putting all the metadata in before you can start writing blog posts, and then having to push it afterwards. Maybe it was because I used Jekyll when I was much younger and didn't have enough to say, and so it was just like partly my own experience that I don't like that. But I really like just how easy it is to use Notion for this. I still have to build the site and push it,
Okay.
but yeah.
Speaking of where, where's the whole kind of build pipeline hosted? Are you on Netlify or something, or just pushing to a server?
I actually build it locally and then push it to GitHub, and then Netlify serves it.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
I have thought about putting it like on a server so that it watches whenever I change something in Notion, or just like every day it builds the website, but I just haven't gotten around to that yet.
Does Notion have any, I guess, given that their whole API is unofficial, they probably won't, but like webhooks or anything like that?
It's kind of crazy that Notion still doesn't have an official API because they've been talking about it for so long.
Yeah.
I don't understand. It's strange.
Gotcha.
And so this new notes site, which I made maybe like a month ago-ish, I don't know, kind of is stemming from a problem I found of actually using Notion for this workflow of the wiki. And I found that trying to make this wiki, I couldn't really interconnect ideas as fluidly as I wanted to. And Rome kind of solved that for me. My first Rome database was actually just really messy and didn't really work very well, and I was about to give up on it just because it wasn't helping me much. But then I decided to just create a new Rome database using kind of what I'd learned, make it not messy or not as messy, and just like try to interconnect pages as much as possible. Very much inspired by Andy Matuszek's notes. And so you can, if this loads, see the similarity between them.
For sure.
Yeah, so he has, so you can just like jump around and let's see if I make this full screen. They appear side by side as you click on pages, and so you can kind of explore the notes and go back to previous ones you're looking at and read them side by side. And so I wanted to kind of emulate that, and so I made something similar. The way it's, oh god. Oh no. I need to fix that. It shouldn't have that scrolling at the end.
Feature, not a bug.
Exactly. The way I am doing this is I'm actually generating. Let's go to the code. So the notes site is actually embedded in my main site, which I don't know if that's a good idea, but that's how it is. And this is also called build.py. Let's see. So this is also using Jinja templating in Python, and I basically load in the exported JSON from Rome. I'm exporting JSON because the Markdown doesn't have as much information in it.
Okay.
JSON has like block IDs and like time it's last edited, and has a lot more data stored in there. Definitely not enough data. As I mentioned with the page IDs, it doesn't have page IDs.
What else? Are there any other big things that are missing?
Probably that's like the biggest pain point for me.
Okay.
And makes it tempting with all the like other software popping up around Rome, like Athens and stuff, to like eventually move to a different one if they don't actually put page IDs in. It's such a little thing, but it's really annoying for me. Okay. I don't know.
We got a couple questions on the interface of the note site.
Yep.
The first one was based on the note you had over there on how to navigate densely linked notes, which is just what plans do you have on kind of exploring how to navigate densely linked notes? And then stemming off of that, how could we, or how to use that navigation to aggregate ideas or do things around that?
Okay, yeah, so I was gonna get to that later, but I can go into it now. I have a lot of ideas for how to expand this site, and like right now, it's very much like the the way it's laid out is very much similar to the way Andy lays out his notes, but I have a lot of ideas for how to take it further. One of those is you can actually zoom in and out, which this is just like an experimental feature to see if it is interesting, but I actually think it's quite useful for exploring because you can see bigger
The whole
picture
collection of
and
ideas.
just like the titles. And if I'm doing my job well, the titles should kind of be really be descriptive of what's on the page, right?
Yeah.
And the pages should be short enough that it's not too hard to like fit it all in your head at once. And so that's just like Control or Alt scroll to zoom in and out.
The zoomed out view is also would be an interesting application of the like iconography stuff you're working on, right? Where
exactly. And
yeah.
I want it so that this is just a prototype right now of zooming in and out, but I want to have different like zoom levels where you might zoom out like maybe this far, and it'll have like one note selected and show like all the pages it links to on the side or something. And so you can like visually see all the connections to one note. And then if you zoom out further, maybe all these notes just become kind of nodes on a graph, and you start to be able to see the whole graph of my notes site, and you can kind of like start exploring around, or maybe not even the whole graph, maybe just like all the notes that are kind of around this vicinity. And that graph could be different based on like what notes you have open. So like if there's a note that connects to these two very well, it might be closer, and one that maybe connects to one but not the other might be a bit further away. And so like you can maybe see the general like area around these notes of the landscape of ideas that I'm thinking about.
What's the process if, like, say you have an idea you want to implement? What are the first steps on hacking on that idea? Are you screwing around in the HTML, the Python templates, or where do you start?
To implement new ideas on my site, I just let's see, I have template.html. Turn this off. Template.html kind of is the main HTML page that it's being built off of. And so in this, I have like dark mode and the note fetching functions functions to update link statuses. So if I click on a link, you can see that it gets highlighted green to show that that link is open.
Okay.
And so I know from just looking at here that this zooming out page is open without having to scroll over here. So yeah, most of it is actually in this template.html.
Gotcha.
For the embedded pages, I'm actually generating HTML for those. So there's like page.html and embed.html.
And so for each node gets a generated page and embed.
And so when I click on a link, it just does a request to the server to get the page.html. And this isn't like a full HTML document, but it just takes this and basically puts it in a page element, and it gets rendered here. It would probably be better to like send the markdown or something and render it on the client, but this is just easy because I had the templating already going, and I'm not actually basing it off markdown. I'm just using the JSON. So I would have to do an extra step to send markdown, and I didn't want to do that.
That's interesting. I hadn't seen this kind of like templates as HTML subpages then being pulled in before. Seems
Yeah,
like
I
a
never
workflow.
thought about it until I did it. I was like, hey, can you do this? Yep. A few other things I want to add. I want to have external backlinks. So right now I have like internal backlinks. So you can see what are the pages that reference this page.
Yeah.
What would be really nice is to have also external backlinks. So there could be 2 tabs to this, internal and external, and the external backlinks would gather anytime this page has been referenced on someone else's site, on like Twitter, just like different places on the internet it's been referenced.
Yeah.
And links back to those. So if people spontaneously have a Twitter discussion about one of the pages on my site, then you can see that discussion from the page, or at least link back to it and kind of see what people are saying. So I think that could be very, very interesting.
Were you looking into using something like web mentions for doing that, or just kind of like
I don't know. I haven't looked into web mentions too much. I know there's like command line like Twitter interface that you can search Twitter for things, and it I think that would definitely work for some kind of like Twitter integration. I need to look into how to actually do this for like finding links on other people's sites. There might be some kind of SEO tools that would be good for that.
The web mention standard is a little gnarly to get implemented. Tom Critchlow, in like one of these events I did, talked about his pains in doing so for his site. But there's a tool called Bridgie, which will integrate a whole bunch of different social services like Twitter and things like that, and give you web mentions out of it, which you can then kind of plug into things. Maybe overkill, but worth looking into.
Yeah, definitely. Some other things that I want to do are like put like link icon here so you can copy the link to a specific page. Maybe some kind of like change log for major changes that I make. I don't know how I'd implement that in Rome. And something that I did recently was I made a Rome theme to emulate what my notes site looked like.
Okay.
And I guess this doesn't look like it right now. But if I go to Rome/CSS, so here you can see I've emulated the style of my notes so that I can kind of now edit it in the same way that it ends up looking. In fact, now this interface is actually just so much nicer for me that my notes website might have a bit of catching up to do, because I can also zoom out with the just like default browser zoom and just like have all the pages side by side and looking at them.
And the opening multiple pages works at a infinite level here, same way as on your site.
Yeah. And so if I just shift click, I can just open. I also have them opening on the right. That's just personal preference. It's possible to have them open on the left as well. I should probably put that as an option in the theme.
How do you even do options in themes?
I don't know.
Yeah, interesting question.
Yeah. I say things and sometimes I don't know how to do them. It's just like, I'll figure something out.
I'm sure, yeah.
I mean, like right now there's some options for like different variables. Wait. I guess I don't have any variables on here, but if I do root and say like page width equals 800 pixels, then my pages are now wider. And so I could have a variable that is like order, and then you just say row or row reverse, because
Okay.
those are the
actual
names for the flex box that I have it under, and so it's doing row reverse to actually put the new pages on the end, because by default they'll be at the start.
Gotcha.
So yeah, that probably wouldn't be too difficult. I kind of like this dark theme. It's kind of like space inspired. And I can also go into the graph overview here. This is something I can't do on my notes site yet, but I can kind of like see the whole graph of it behind as I'm editing, and kind of like explore different things I'm thinking about.
Nice. That's fun.
So yeah, I like that workflow, and I'm amazed that you can have all these workflow changes just with CSS. And
what's the I don't know, how difficult was this to achieve with CSS? Was it a lot of wrangling, or?
Yeah,
I guess as
and
much.
I may have done something a bit stupid in that I had a plugin that I hadn't turned off that was changing Rome's CSS, but in such a subtle way that I didn't notice it.
Huh.
And that was
it?
injecting a lot of overrides that I couldn't figure out how to override in my code. And so it was just so frustrating. And I realized afterwards that I was putting way too many overrides and I didn't need all that. But yeah.
That must have been a satisfying realization, at least.
But yeah, like this theme was inspired by my notes site, and then my notes site might take inspiration a bit more from the theme. Just like
that's awesome.
Going back and forth. And definitely I have a lot of ideas for how I can make this site a bit better.
A suggestion that popped up ages ago that I didn't bring up was from Bardia. I think you should have overflow scroll for the preview when you hover over an internal link, so that I assume you could explore the entire thing just right there.
Yeah. I don't know why these aren't showing up there. Yeah, that's actually something kind of stupid right now in that I'm actually disabling scroll. I shouldn't be, but
fair.
Yeah, I just need to enable it again. And instead of embedding a page, the reason I disabled scroll and clicking on links is because if you have iframe, which it's in right now, if you click on a link in the iframe, then it will go to the actual page, which has different CSS, and it'll look weird in here. Because this is the embed.html, which has special CSS to look like this. So instead of doing that iframe, what I'm gonna do instead is just do the same thing I do when requesting a new page. Just get the page.html, drop it in here, put whatever CSS I want on it, and when I click on a page in here, it can even show up at the end and like scroll that. Someone also suggested a while back that I make the scrolling smoother, because when I click on something, it just like jumps to that page that opened, and so making it like kind of smoothly scroll over would be nice.
That's just a CSS option, isn't it, for scrolling smooth?
I don't know, because I'm setting the scroll in JavaScript. I would probably just have to have like a loop that updates.
I see. Are you not just linking with the ID of the element, or?
No.
Oh, okay.
Because I'm adding a new element on the page and then just like scrolling there.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's possible to like set a place in the page without reloading it.
Could be interesting. If the element exists, you can just link to it with the ID as the after the hash in the URL, but might not
Right.
work.
I also should put all the pages you have open in the URL so that when you reload the page, it doesn't like destroy everything.
And you can like link to a whole set of notes. That's also
Yeah,
pretty
exactly.
sweet.
And if you want to just link to one note, then you can always open that in a new tab and just like send that link. Or as I want to implement, just have like a link icon that copies the link to that specific
Gotcha.
note. These these altmetric badges are kind of what inspired me to think about putting external links. I think, I guess this site isn't great demo. I found them on like the MIT books website, and I don't know if I can copy, open image in new tab. It shows all the different places something has been mentioned. And so like for the books on their book website, it's just like shows all the places that book has been cited or mentioned on the internet on all kinds of different sites. And I thought that's really neat. And they have this kind of nice little rainbow visualization where like Twitter might be this like blue color. And so the colors of this little badge change depending on what platforms people are talking about it on, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
It was definitely like one of the nicest implementations of this like backlink visualization I've seen. Maybe not the most usable in all contexts, but
I mean, it's kind of focused on more like macro backlink patterns, right? Which you need something that's linked to a lot to really get the utility out of that.
Yeah, exactly.
One question was, how does this side-by-side flow change your workflow versus vertical, if at all? Especially when writing in rows.
Yeah, when writing in Roam, it's, I think, really great to have a lot of things open at once because you can kind of jump between them, edit something here, edit something there. And so I often have quite a few things open. Like this. And what's interesting also, I think, is like the style of writing in this way. It's like just like writing a bunch of ideas down on a page is much different than writing and actively kind of making these connections to other pages. And I think that, if anything, has been what's changed my workflow the most, in that it makes writing actually a lot more difficult in this way, but it makes it so much more satisfying. So writing 1,000 words, like that might take hours or like a whole day, but by the end of that, I won't have explored just one idea, but I'll have explored like 10 different ideas around a topic, or maybe branching out into different topics. And it's just so much more satisfying. You've like kind of gone through so much more like bigger ideas than if I just sat down and spewed out 1,000 words off the top of my head about one specific topic. Here, it's just much more focused and condensed, and it actually creates new ideas out of that, and that you start seeing the connections between things and think of connections that you might not have otherwise made. And so I think that's something that's very useful about this backlinking structure, and also about having things side by side, because you could have things side by side with something that's completely different and kind of like be copying and getting inspiration from it.
Yeah, it reminds me of the peripheral vision idea in Andy notes, right, where you can just have, just because most screens are going to be more horizontal than vertical. You can just fit more ideas on one span of your vision.
For sure. One thing that would be super nice is if I could like drag these pages around and reorder them. I can't do that with CSS, obviously, but I could like write a JavaScript plugin or something that like lets you drag the page and reorder it, and that would be super useful, I think, because if you have two pages that you want to be editing side by side, instead of like condensing them down or closing them, you can just drag them side by side and start working on them right away.
Yeah.
So I think that would be really, really cool.
For sure. I remember a tweet from Yoshiki, I'm forgetting his handle, on like websites as window managers, or like, you know, the inability to do different layouts for windows in particular pages and how frustrating that is. Doesn't seem like something you can get away with just CSS, but definitely if you can't pull it off, there's a lot of utility there.
Yeah, there is actually like a CSS rule for dragging, but it's just like the default browser dragging, like where, I don't know, you've probably done this before, where you like accidentally drag an image or something.
Sure.
And it doesn't do anything. But here you could set on an entire element to have that similar kind of dragging experience if you ever wanted to do something like that. But it doesn't really let you do that kind of reordering.
Yeah.
Maybe in like CSS5 or something, CSS6, you'll be able to do like all kinds of dragging stuff around. And
CSS6 and ES20 are just the same thing.
Yeah, basically. They all merge into one.
Awesome. Are there any other weird corners of your sites we haven't yet peered into?
Oh, I'm sure there are, but I wonder if people want to see more of the code, or if we should like wrap up and just do some kind of just questions at the end here.
Yeah, we are pushing up on the hour, so yeah, if anyone has any questions, these would be a great time to bring them up. I don't know. I always get a lot of value out of digging into code more, so that's my default area of interest if no one speaks otherwise. Yeah. What are the kind of most frustrating to deal with bits of the back end here?
Most frustrating things to deal with?
Yeah.
I'm going to interpret that in a different way, maybe, than it's intended. But one kind of frustrating thing about this whole process and workflow of actually like building these static site generators for Notion or Roam is that it actually changes the way I use the tool and limits what I can do.
Okay.
And you can see like here in Roam, I'm not like really densely like nesting things. I'm not like using queries or diagrams or tables or any of the special features that people are always going on and on about. Basically just using these links and external links, internal links, some levels of nesting, but not a whole lot. And that's just because of how it gets built into my static site. I don't have all of the features of Roam implemented in there. And so I'm kind of limiting myself to using the features I've implemented in my static site.
So what would Roam give you if you exported a page which had like a table on it or a diagram?
Well, you would end up having like one block, I guess, that has this like table with
So it
these
just gives
curly
you the
brackets.
raw.
And
Okay.
in theory, I could just like test for that and either ignore it or actually generate some,
Your own table.
like actually generate a table with it. That's just another thing I'd have to implement, and I haven't. So I don't end up using tables because I haven't implemented tables.
Fair enough.
And it's the same with Notion. I can only use what I've implemented. There, at least, I've implemented a lot more of the blocks. So it's quite flexible. I can put columns. I can put just about anything I want. But it also does limit me to kind of that like flat structure of those collections, and I'm not able yet to like nest like hierarchies of pages within pages, or do anything like that.
Yeah, that's an interesting limitation where you're just kind of handicapping the features you can use in order to get this output. Yeah.
Self-handicap.
But it lets you definitely experiment with a lot more than you'd be able to experiment just boxed into one of the tools itself, I think.
Something that's kind of funny is this dark mode. And so if I go to settings here, I have this toggle dark mode, and that's actually Hiccup. And so Hiccup is like the closure to generate HTML that you can put into a Roam block, and it'll generate HTML for it.
Okay.
And so I have an on-click handler here that calls toggle dark mode, and of course it doesn't do anything on this Roam database, but when it gets exported to my site, this is actually something I did implement so that it can generate the Hiccup. But if I, here it's a different color, if I click it, it just changes the mode for my site. And so in the future, I could potentially have a lot of different settings here that do different things of how my site gets displayed.
So is the JavaScript actually being, like in Roam itself, the only issue there is that JavaScript function doesn't exist on the page? Or is it that Roam?
Yeah, it doesn't do anything. And when I click on it, it's not actually getting the click. It's just opening the block.
Okay. So, so it doesn't get click events.
Yeah, gotcha. I think. I don't know how you can do that. Maybe if you like prevent default, or I don't know.
That'd be interesting.
Stop propagation. This was kind of inspired by TiddlyWiki, because I used to have a TiddlyWiki like years back, and that's part of what made Notion so appealing to me. It's because I'd already done some of that kind of wiki style writing.
Yeah.
But on TiddlyWiki, I think all of the like different settings and internal pages are just pages on TiddlyWiki that you can go to and change the settings. So I thought, wouldn't it be great if like the settings page on my notes site is using the same kind of like page structure as my notes site.
Amazing.
So yeah, I took some inspiration from that.
Nice. I think we're running up right on the hour, so any last parting thoughts or things you wanted to dig into?
Does anyone have any last questions, or should we wrap it up? I think that's about all. Nothing immediate is coming to mind.
Okay.
I guess one other experiment I did was just like changing the color of the wiki pages when I update them, and you can see I haven't updated these for a while. That's about it.
Yeah, I get the feeling we'll have to do another one of these in like a couple months to talk about all the experiments you've done in the intervening span. Yeah, it's like there's always lots of little things changing here.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, thank you so much for the tour. There's a lot to think about from these experiments and also the potential of taking all these data sources and doing new things with them. I'm sure, both Rome and Notion would have a lot to learn or a lot to take from the ways in which you're using their site.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks everyone for coming. This was, I think, the largest one of these we've done. It's a kind of event series that's been going on for the last couple of months. The next one's going to be in 2 weeks again, and it's with Matt Bayer, who's the founder of Write.as. I'm going to drop the link in the chat if anyone wants to come to that. Yeah, I think that's about it. Oh, and this is all, if you want to keep going these kind of conversations and digging into this kind of thing, it's the sort of stuff we're exploring over at hyperlink.academy, where there's also a forum where we could carry on the conversation if you're interested. So
that's hyperlink.academy.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, thanks for coming, everybody. I hope maybe some of this will inspire you to do stuff with your own sites, or you can also delve into my code and figure out how to kind of create your own static site generator with Rome or Notion. It's not very well documented, but with some effort, you can probably figure it out. And yeah, thanks for coming.
And if you do something interesting, let me know, and we can do a little tour of it.
For sure.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah.
Bye.